Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics. Today, this is one of our Solidarity Friday episodes. How you doing today, Kyle?
Good, Joe. How are you doing?
Wonderful. Another beautiful day in paradise.
Nice.
What's going on in Jersey? Is it kind of cooling down, fall kicking in at all?
It's actually pretty warm out. I think today's supposed to get up high 60s. Yesterday was up high 60s, low 70s maybe. Colors are popping, which is really nice.
That's fantastic. Yeah. All of the leaves are gone here. So next up is snow.
Winter.
Yeah. I think some of the ski resorts open up really soon, actually. I'm not going to go out for at least a few weeks. Hopefully get some physical therapy in before I put my body at risk. So we'll see what happens. Yeah. What else? Some scary COVID spikes. I don't know if you saw that. Your region, the governors are suggesting that there's no non-essential travel between New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. It's pretty creepy. And I'm kind of happy I canceled my plans to go back because I would have been there right now.
Yeah, we're having some increases in cases. I think last time I checked it in here in New Jersey, it's been over 1,000 cases for the past few days and then about like 30 deaths recently. So I don't know. They say we're starting to hit a second wave. So just trying to stay grounded and see what happens. Hopefully it doesn't get too crazy, but I don't know. Fall, winter, decreased daylight. We're all going to have to ride through this wave, right?
I just got my second flu shot in my adult memory. I don't know if I used to get them when I was a child, but second ever flu shot. I felt like shit for a little bit, but it was certainly better than getting the flu. And based on my memory of what I thought was corona when I had it, it was as bad as 2 flus. It was not really awesome at all. So if I can at least eliminate my risk of, getting a flu this year, totally into it. Like typically I'm not super vaccine oriented, but I'm leaning that way now. So yeah, wishing Pfizer the best, and hopefully they pull it together and don't make too many mistakes.
Yeah,
or any mistakes, but we'll see. You never know. All right, so this episode comes out on Friday. If you want, there might be a couple spots left in our psychedelics and philosophy class. It's $200, and you can. It's in 15 weeks long. It's going to be with Lenny Gibson as kind of the lead instructor and Kyle and I as kind of co-instructors and helpers. We're going to go through the Western philosophical tradition from the pre-Socratics, Socrates, Plato, all through the Western tradition, ending at Whitehead, and with some Zen Buddhism peppered in there as well for good measure. And yeah, it's going to be amazing. And you can learn more at psychedeliceducationcenter.com if that's something you're into. I tend to think philosophy is really important to make sure we're asking the right questions and using terms the right way. So it might be helpful. Kyle, I've been reading this book on Bergson and his interactions with Einstein called The Physicist and the Philosopher, I think, or The Scientist and the Philosopher. And it's really, Bergson's kind of like a pre-Whitehead person in that similar tradition, roughly. And it's just really fascinating to watch this debate between science and philosophy. And how like they're just not really hearing each other often,
right?
Especially back then. I think philosophers are a lot better at communicating now than they were then. That's why kind of Peter Schwarz H is like pretty great these days and can help people understand what they're talking about specifically, as opposed to like, oh, I'm saying this and therefore it's universal. It's like, well, this might only fall into these 3 categories as true, and those other 9 might not work. And, not to mention nature of mind, philosophy of mind, and how that relates to psychedelics is a big deal for us.
Right. Yeah, I have that book queued up and it's on my list to listen to. But I also think it's interesting too, the timing of this course, and then also the release of The Immortality Key by Brian Morescu. I think I said his last name right.
Started it this morning and last night.
Awesome. Yeah, I just downloaded it, hopefully getting into that. But I was just listening to that podcast with him on Joe Rogan with Graham Hancock. And yeah, just to learn more about these ancient rites and mystery rites and, just really interesting. I think It's going to be fun digging into philosophy for the next 15 weeks with this course. Just thinking about also these
Did I tell you I booked him
rites
for the podcast?
Sweet. Excited.
I just booked Brian this morning for the podcast. So we'll record next month with him, hopefully. So I got to finish the book in the next week or so. Yeah. Yeah, it should be cool. So that'll be exciting. Hopefully I have some good challenging questions for him. I've already got some things kind of on deck that I'm curious about limitations and where he went with that. But, you know, he did what he could with what he had. And can't really fault people for doing that. So, all right, what else is going on? Sales should be up soon for Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists Live Supported Edition. That's going to start in January. It'll be 8 weeks, just like our past courses, and will be amazing. There should be 2 sections available, and stay tuned for that. PsychedeliCeducationCenter.com if you want to learn more. And if you always just want to learn more about what we have going on, join our email list at psychedelicstoday.com, or just sign up for one of our free classes, and it'll get you on there. So I think that's good for right now. And I kind of want to start talking about salvia. Salvia is a maligned plant because of this whole kind of crazy YouTube explosion. This is like the drug that was available at head shops, or plant that was available at head shops all over right when YouTube was kind of coming on. So people could take videos of themselves tripping, and people would kind of dissociate a lot and not really understand what was happening in 3D space. So, you know, a lot of crazy shit happened, like people running out of windows, thankfully first floor most of the time. Not getting, I don't know of any super bad injuries, but, you know, people get so dissociated that they do all sorts of stuff, kind of like the Ambien kind of waking or dreaming, waking life stuff that was going on for a little bit there. But,
plus just the interesting thing with gravity with salvia. I don't know.
Dimensionality, gravity, squishing.
It's like a twisting, squishing, pushing, pulling sensation at times. I remember, my early years, the couple times I had it, I remember just running in circles and feeling like I had no control over it. It felt like something was pushing me and I just had to go along with it. So super weird.
Did you, weird plant. In your recent oral session, the tincture, did you get any of that dimensionality, or was it just a nice, calm, meditative thing?
Calm, meditative. I mean, I took a very mild dose, so I'm curious to see what it's like when I possibly up the dose there, see what type of effect it has. But it was just pretty mild, pretty just a meditative thing. Felt like, you know, a little bit of like energy, I guess like a little alteration in consciousness, but it was pretty calm. I actually enjoyed it, but I'm curious to see what like a higher dose of the tincture form feels like, or what type of effect it has.
Totally. Yeah. I know we've been curious about it ever since I think you encountered Twig Harper way back, who's super into this stuff. And
I remember him in his symposia talk years ago talking about how he was like formulating the tincture. I don't remember it 100%, but just hearing him talk about like being in the float tank and just getting all these messages from salvia to start putting together this tincture form. Really interesting. I think he was actually selling a bunch of tincture at that conference too. But I haven't heard too much from him or seen too much from him.
It's been pretty quiet
in the past few years. So
I had a great phone call with him 2 years ago when I wanted to kind of start working with him a little bit, but I forget what happened. Stuff fell apart, and we never kind of followed up. But he was a really cool dude. His videos, I think, are still up on the internet somewhere from those talks, and they're worth checking out. So it looks like Hopkins has been doing some salvia work. We had some of that information leaked to us a while back, and I was asked not to share too much about it, but they've got essentially an FDA approved pipe. And this Wired.com article says crack pipe. I don't think that's fair. I'd like to be a little more clear, freebase pipe, because, you know, if you're smoking salvia and DMT and crack out of the same instrument, what gives crack the dominance? You know? I think it's, you know, just a freebase pipe, like an oil roller is what some people call it, I guess. Yeah. So it's a little tough. I would advise folks don't use that term crack pipe. And what I think I noticed is that they're smoking pure Salvinorin A. I thought I read something around micrograms, like 15 micrograms smoked.
It's a very potent substance. Probably it's more potent than LSD. And I remember hearing Peter Addy talk about it being the most potent psychedelic in the sense of
I think
weight.
the most potent naturally occurring psychedelic by plant weight.
Yeah.
But I don't think we've looked at, maybe before this, like pure Salvinorin A. Trying to pull up the dose here in this Nature article. How did you find this article, Kyle?
Somebody posted it. And so, yeah, looked really interesting.
Cool. And it looks like they've been studying this for a while. I'm noticing in the references here that Matt Johnson, Catherine McLean, Ressig, Griffiths, and a few others like had a Salvinorin study in 2011, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think I remember Catherine McLean chatting about it on a podcast years ago. And I was surprised to hear that they were actually experimenting with Salvinorin A at Johns Hopkins that long ago. This new article that just came out was published October 2nd, 2020, and it's on nature.com called The Acute Effects of an Atypical Dissociative Hallucinogen, Salvinorin A on Functional Connectivity in the Human Brain.
It's pretty intense reading. A lot of fMRI stuff, a lot of neuroscience, really dense. But I guess, what's cool here is that this is a kappa opioid agonist, I believe, and it's very different from typical classical psychedelics that are hitting very different receptor sites. So we're seeing psychedelic effects through a different receptor site, which could challenge a lot of our assumptions about how psychedelics work, which I'm really happy about. I'm just glad to see that there's a new thing being researched that challenges a lot of our assumptions. Because I read some article saying, any drug that, tickles 5-HT2A is a psychedelic. I'm like, that doesn't appear to me to be true.
Right.
Or like all psychedelics are 5-HT2A agonists or whatever. So I'm like,
and we brought that up on that cannabis one too, right? Cannabis possibly activating it, and it seems like a colloquial, I guess, decision there that the 5-HT2A is the psychedelic receptor. But I think this is all still very new. I remember I pulled this up on our class last week, and this is the one quote that stuck out on the Wired magazine article. So Dr. Doss quoted here, research on classic psychedelic drugs like LSD, psilocybin, and DMT has been focusing on the default mode network because it's been hijacked by a Freudian narrative that requires a concrete ego, says Doss, referring to the psychoanalytical concept of self. This, he says, has caused researchers to focus less attention on changes in activity elsewhere in the brain, even though those changes are often larger than in the default mode network. Moreover, non-psychedelic drugs, including cannabis and alcohol, also cause decreases in the default mode network activity, which complicates the idea that it might be the root of a psychedelic experience. And the fact that Salvinorin A selectively targets the network only adds to the confusion because it's so different from the classic psychedelics in most other respects. Yeah, and as you said, one of the biggest difference here is it primarily acts on serotonin. While psychedelics act on the serotonin receptors, Salvinorin A, kappa opioid receptor. So I thought that was an interesting comment that the default mode network being hijacked by a Freudian narrative, right? Like the idea that, this orchestrator of self is, I guess, kind of being decreased and the ego starts to dissolve. And I just thought that was kind of interesting. And, as, Ito and I explored on the Shadow course, this idea of so focused on ego death and ego dissolution within the psychedelic space. And, how could we also challenge that at times? Do we always need to seek ego death to have profound healing and psychedelic experiences? Could it be more gentle at times?
My eyes rolled when Doss was mentioning a concrete ego. So it's an idea. Ideas can't really be concrete, right? It's, I think no one's corrected me on this, so I believe I'm right, that, Carhart Harris had this kind of Freudian background. And perhaps that's why a lot of his narratives are coming out as Freudian. Yeah, like this ego construct is something that I don't think we have a great frame for anymore these days. Like it was the only model for a little while, and now we're getting kind of better and more sophisticated. Things are getting more confusing. So people want to maybe have some sort of crutch that feels concrete, even though it might not be. Yeah, this fallacy of misplaced concreteness. Is that it? It's we have to understand like what is concrete and what isn't. Like, my finger is pretty concrete, or like those books are pretty concrete, but the idea of the ego is still an abstraction. So talking of abstractions, I wanted to read the abstract from this Nature article, just so people kind of have an idea here. So title of the article, The Acute Effects of Atypical Dissociative Hallucinogen, Salvinorin A on Functional Connectivity in the Human Brain. I'm going to skip over parentheses here, but Salvinorin A is a kappa opioid receptor agonist and atypical dissociative hallucinogen found in Salvia divinorum. Despite the resurgence of hallucinogen studies, the effects of K-opioid agonist on human brain function are not well understood. This placebo-controlled within subject study used fMRI for the first time to explore the effects of inhaled SA, salvia, on strength, variability, and entropy of functional connectivity. SA tended to decrease within network SFC. Fuck is SFC? Yeah, I wish I knew.
Static functional connectivity.
But increase between network static functional connectivity with the most prominent effect being attenuation of the default mode network during the first half of a 20-minute scan. SA reduced brain-wide DFC, but increased brain-wide EFC, though only the former effect survived multiple comparison corrections. Finally, using connectome-based classification, most models trained on DFC network interaction could accurately classify the first half of SA scans. In contrast, few models trained on, within, or between network SFC and EFC performed above chance. Notably, models trained on, within DMN, SFC, and EFC performed better than models trained on other network interactions. This pattern of SA effects on human brain function is strikingly similar to that of other hallucinogens, necessitating studies of direct comparison. So hopefully that wasn't too much. It was a lot, but it's important to understand what they're saying if we're going to speak about it. So, yeah. I advise you all to try to read it. It's definitely interesting and challenges some of our assumptions.
Yeah, there's a quote here in The Wire too by Doss, which I thought this is how they ended it, and I thought this was a really interesting way to end this article. So there's a lot of information out there on how the brain produces thoughts and behaviors, but much of that is being ignored in psychedelic research, says Doss. Instead of what many are doing is simply looking at brain activity and selectively interfering its function, when there's never a clear one-to-one mapping between brain activity observed with fMRI and the consequent mental operations. Not only does this tell me how little we understand psychedelics, it also tells me how little we understand how to study them. That was a really interesting way to end the article. And, I know that's something that we've kind of touched on in the past, just talking about the research here and how little we do really know about how to maybe approach this, right? Like, I don't know, whenever I think about some of the studies coming out, like you see this focus on the 5-HT2A, and then you see this focus on the default mode network. And then it's like, well, what causes what, right? It's like, oh, we understand why we're having this experience because it's a default mode network. But then it's like, well, what's going on with these, receptor sites and, what other things in the brain are we not looking at that might be influencing the experience? So, yeah, really interesting.
Yeah. So like there seems to be this trend in the scientific world to say, okay, cool. Like our data suggests that this model of the world and how things are working is true. Therefore, this model is true, and kind of like sticking to your guns on that. And I think because we finally have our tools back where we can examine the psyche after decades of prohibition, that maybe let's not rush. Like, let's keep them hypotheses And perhaps we can be more fluid when new hypotheses come out about the world and the mind and the brain and these things. Like perhaps that'll help us, not necessarily have to live in a certain paradigm for a super long time. And we can be a little bit more paradigm fluid, maybe, or model agnostic, and just kind of shift around as new data comes to light.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think that's the end of my rant for right there. So I'm good on salvia. Are you?
Yep. Good on this. Definitely encourage people to check out that Nature article. If you're interested in the neuroscience and understand what's going on there. It's a really great article to check into. And I'm just, excited. I mean, it's just funny how we just keep bringing up salvia and our interest in it. So I'm just excited to see some research out there now about it. It'd be a really interesting medicine down the line. Yeah.
Right. Totally. And I just love that we have that blog up on our site talking about that too and exploring it. Next article, also from Nature, nature.com. It's published or accepted for publication for neuropsychopharmacology. This was published lightly online, unedited on October 15. Title is Acute Dose-Dependent Effects of Lysergic Acid Diethylamide in a Double-Blind Placebo-Controlled Study in Healthy Subjects. I think this research was done in Switzerland. Yeah, Basel, University of Basel, and then University Hospital Basel. So all Swiss, which is cool. And I'll read the abstract again. Hopefully it's not too dry. So here it is. Growing interest has been seen in using LSD in psychiatric research and therapy. However, no modern studies have evaluated subjective and autonomic effects of different and pharmaceutically well-defined doses of LSD. Yeah, that makes sense because in the wild, it's quite variable. We used double-blind randomized placebo-controlled crossover design in 16 healthy subjects, 8 women, 8 men, who underwent 6 25-hour sessions and received placebo, LSD, placebo, then LSD at 25, 50, 100, and 200 micrograms, and 200 micrograms LSD after 1 hour administering the serotonin 5-HT2A receptor antagonist ketanserin at 40 milligrams. Test days were separated by at least 10 days. Outcome measures included self-rating scales that evaluated subjective effects, autonomic effects, adverse effects, plasma-derived neurotropic factor, BDNF, levels, and pharmacokinetics up to 24 hours. The pharmacokinetic subjective response relationship was evaluated. LSD showed dose proportional pharmacokinetics and first-order elimination and dose-dependently induced subjective responses starting at the 25 microgram dose. A ceiling effect was observed for good drug effects at 100 micrograms, which is a weird statement. I'd like to know more about that. The 200 microgram dose of LSD induced greater ego dissolution than the 100 microgram dose and induced significant anxiety. The average duration of subjective effects increased from 6.7 to 11 hours with increased doses of 25 to 200 micrograms. LSD moderately increased blood pressure and heart rate. Ketanserin effectively prevented the response to 200 micrograms of LSD, which is weird. The LSD dose response curve showed a ceiling effect for subjective good effects, and ego dissolution and anxiety increased at a dose above 100 micrograms. The results may assist with dose findings for future LSD research. The full psychedelic effects of LSD are primarily mediated by 5-HT2A receptor activation. And abstract. So there's a lot there. I'm really just happy to see the Swiss are stepping it up, taking on their homeland's creation here. And it's pretty awesome. Like 25, 50, 100, and 200 microgram sessions. Like this is data we sorely need, especially with our modern instruments, to like understand how much can be absorbed, like how quickly it goes away, and a lot of other stuff. Like I was curious about the 200 microgram stuff causing bad effects. The ceiling for good effects is it's kind of a weird phrase, but
Right.
psychotherapeutically, this stuff, it works really well at 200 to 300 micrograms. So what's going on there?
Yeah, I wonder what type of setting they were in and if they were doing therapy or if they were just tracking, drug effect and kind of rating
Looks like
it
they're
that
just
way.
giving them drugs. Yeah, nothing here about therapy. I imagine like when this is published, we'll get more data for it because it looks like they only published the abstract. So hopefully we get access to this sooner than later. Yeah, the pharmacokinetics I think are really important for us to study. It's kind of crazy that this is one of the most affordable and available drugs in the black market, and we don't know. Like we've got a lot of data from the olden days, but we don't have too much modern data, and I find that a little problematic. And I'm just like really happy to see that this is going on. And this other drug, catanserin, which is a 5-HT2A agonist, I guess, blocking response. It is a receptor antagonist at 40 milligrams, blocked the response to 200 micrograms of LSD.
Wow.
So I guess if you're hanging out with some like problematic hippies that like to dose people, you could eat that before and hopefully not get high. I don't know anything about that drug though. It's the first time I heard of this drug.
Yeah.
Makes me wonder if it's like that mind med trip blocker or something. It's clinically used as an antihypertensive agent. And Janssen Pharmaceutica discovered it in the 80s or in 1980. So it's not mind med drug, but perhaps they're able to find one that's able to like abort trips or something like that.
Right. Well, yeah, and that's what it sounds like they're trying to explore over there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't really have too much else to say about this other than thank you to all the researchers on this one in Switzerland. I really just hope you keep on doing LSD research and can't wait to read the full study.
Yeah, we need more of it. And it's just interesting. I think there's a lot of different reasons why LSD isn't being researched in certain places, right? The kind of cultural stigma that's still carried, but also the length of time and the amount of clinical resources you may need, much longer than psilocybin or, even ketamine for that too. So, thinking about what are they saying here, 6 to 11 hours, LSD can last pretty long. That's a lot of resources to be providing somebody, especially if you're doing therapy with. So I don't know. We definitely need more research in this realm, and hopefully they keep at it because it doesn't seem like the states are doing anything really. I haven't really come across too much stuff around here.
Like, I guess the big issue is that you've got to be identified in a particular way to get massive federal funding. So like, for instance, a few years back, I don't even know the name of the group, but it was a high priority in the federal government to understand autism better. So a lot of PhDs were getting funded to do autism research. And one of my friends got funding to do a psychology PhD through this kind of grant process. And psychedelics aren't there yet. Like, this is all private funding and, nonprofits and for-profit entities as opposed to federal research dollars coming in. Realistically, it would take a small fraction of the federal research budget to kind of get psychedelics back on track. But, other stuff is taking priority, obviously coronavirus, Zika virus, and a few other, hopefully we get some sort of predictive pandemic outbreak services up and running soon, since they were canceled by the president a while back. Hopefully those come back, and hopefully we have better responses to viruses and other outbreaks in the future. But psychedelics would really do well with federal funding. It's not really happening. In other countries, I think it's perhaps easier to get federal funds to do research like this. Or like, whatever national level funds. I don't know if that term federal is universalizable. So, for what it's worth, thank you to the Swiss government for helping these people do this research. And hopefully other governments want to step it up as well.
Yep. And I just think about, obviously, the mental health crisis and, more research needs to be done. And if we have these tools, can we help to speed up the process here? If we're going to be battling a mental health crisis. I mean, it's starting to unfold. Just really curious on how things are going to go for the next few months, the election and winter and everything. So I don't know, more tools on deck. I think we need to throw more research funds at treating mental health better and talking about it. I
told you this one.
Being open.
Yeah. Talk. Let's keep bringing this stuff up, making it less stigmatized to discuss. A few years back, Kyle, I don't know if I told you this one. I was at this Rotary International fundraiser here in Breck, and there's like people from all over the state of Colorado came, and I think the head of Rotary Australia came over. And Rotary is kind of a weird organization. People are like, "What is Rotary?" Well, it's just essentially a social benefit club, and they raise money to do things. And their primary mission was to eradicate polio, which they've essentially done. And the group in Australia, so Rotary Australia, said, "Okay, what's our next mission?" And they chose mental health to be their next mission.
Awesome.
So, they like to work on things that'll take over 80 years to really make an impact on, which is great. And perhaps there's access to funding through Rotary Australia or other Rotary organizations. And these people have a lot of money and they want to do the most good. It's just perhaps a little tricky to convince them of what's the best, the highest good, and what helps the most people. Like clean water is obviously a low-hanging fruit, but mental health care and figuring out this stuff could, really have long lasting benefits. Like what happens if PTSD is eliminated in like the countries that have it the worst, like the 10 countries that have it the worst. Like Israel, I think 10% of the population has PTSD. Like that's pretty bad, and perhaps promotes bad behavior. Like I've been pretty critical of some of their bad actions, and perhaps PTSD is partly to blame. Who knows? And not to mention like intergenerational PTSD, like
right. Yeah.
Jewish folks have a lot of trauma, and for a good reason. Like fucking went through hell many times. So, no doubt that trauma is going to play out. If you look at an individual family system, right? Like this stuff just passes.
Yeah. And it's interesting, like the intergenerational trauma, like some of that research started to come up because they were noticing children of Holocaust survivors actually were presenting more with PTSD symptoms than the people that actually went through it. And then just thinking about like, the health effects of that over time. So yeah, it's interesting.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
More than the survivors. Like if you read some of the accounts of some survivors, like Viktor Frankl, for instance, like it's kind of crazy how well he did psychologically. Like I think the biggest point in the book is like, look at me. I went through one of the worst things you can go through, and here I am still doing important work. Blows my mind. There are people who, weren't able to cope that well. And there were people who definitely had, hardcore structural damage from it. Like you starve for a long time, you're going to get brain damage and, body issues. But those that did thrive, it's like really impressive. I don't really understand how that works. But the stuff with the children's really interesting to me. I would love to understand the dynamics there a little better.
Yeah, I did a paper on it when I was in school, so I could dig up some of those research articles and post them around.
Yeah, intergenerational trauma, epigenetics. Like I think they've shown it in mouse models too, that you can like have trigger a fear response to certain stimuli and have it pass through generations. And it's something that I hope we figure out so that we can survive these perilous times where climate change isn't our only risk still, right? Like there's nuclear war, there's nerve gases, biological war. There's all sorts of crazy things that can come down the pipes when people are in a traumatized, afraid state. Like not great stuff can happen as a result.
Yeah. And this has always been the huge interest of mine with like I guess like transpersonal healing, right? Whether that's through breath work, psychedelics, or just like different inner work where, how much of what we're dealing with is kind of from this like intergenerational trauma. And I always come back to this guy, Martin Prechtel, kind of talking about this. We're always on the go, never really at home anywhere, always kind of being chased by these hungry ghosts or these old traumas. And what would it be like if we continue to try to sit with it and face it? And I think, psychedelics and some of these other, holotropic states help us maybe analyze maybe what happened in the past, and maybe try to help heal some of that. So we're not constantly stuck in maybe these trauma vortexes unconsciously, right? Like, maybe we don't even know why we're acting out and doing the things that we do, until we can like kind of go in and realize that, oh man, this feels like it's just embedded into our DNA, right? Maybe epigenetically there. So for me, I think that's the most interesting part of healing is like, how do we heal some of these things that are in our bodies and in our DNA, passed down from generations beforehand, and how can we confront it and deal with it now and not try to pass some of that stuff on? I mean, we're always going to pass stuff on, right? It's impossible not to, but I think showing up and just being conscious of it and trying to work with it is some of the work here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, making the unconscious conscious and stewarding it well. There's this conversation around intergenerational trauma and like a particular nation's kind of presentation in psychedelic states is something that comes up once in a while. Like somebody asked, I think it was in class, about like, do certain groups have certain kinds of responses? Right? Something along those lines. And I recalled like a lot of stories about how Irish people and German people have really particularly rhyming reactions physically on the mat when doing breath work. So like they look really similar. And perhaps a lot of these, like, Irish people went through a lot of shit, like genocide for sure. And German people also went through a lot of bad times from World War I and on. And, a lot of that, well, not to mention Black Plague, like we're still, there are epigenetic things from way back that we're probably still reacting to. And yeah, these things kind of present, and there seems to be like a certain pattern that plays out when, Irish or German people are on the mat. And yeah, I'm just kind of curious, like how that works. Like, what is that? Is this just these epigenetic memories? Is it like a group soul thing? Like some people like to talk about, like, man, I wish I remembered the name of this author. He's kind of like tied in with Fritjof Capra and a few other people of that era, talking about like,
cool,
group dynamics. How you have like the individual, consciousness, then you've got like family, then you've got like a larger organization like town, and then like bigger subdivisions like country, and then world. So we've got kind of like levels of, for lack of a better word right now, soul for these different groups. So you got like various group souls, like could be morphogenetic fields of some kind,
right,
for individual groups. And it's kind of like a Russian nesting doll. They all exist, but they exist in different ways and may have interactions. Like a certain issue could kind of overlap three of these zones, as opposed to just being in one, like just being purely biological or virus oriented or something. Like perhaps there's other stuff going on. So hopefully that wasn't too much of a crazy rant, but exploring an idea that has been coming up for me a lot, and people have asked about recently. America, I think, is too diverse to like have one yet.
Right.
Well, it's like really diverse and really homogenous at the same time. So it's a little weird. I don't really know how to talk about that, but I imagine some really interesting stuff would happen in China, because they've been a lot more uniform for a lot longer than we have.
Right. Interesting.
Right. I would love to do breathwork in China with people. Someone fly me over. I'm in. Well,
or I guess that other idea, talking about C-sections and how I know Lenny always kind of talked about it being like one big social experiment. And in Brazil, I think he said it was over 60% of the population is like a C-section. And yeah, what type of effect does that have on generations? And coming back from like Stan's perinatal matrices and theories, right? Like, interesting. how is that gonna unfold?
Check this out. I found this stat. So 2017 C-section rate in OECD countries, so like rich countries, I guess, per 1,000 live births. Oh, holy moly. I didn't expect this. So 531 out of 1,000 in Turkey, 451 per 1,000 in Korea, 393 in Poland, 373 Hungary, 338 Italy, and then 320 out of 1,000 in US. That's wild. So
Wow.
I think there is a lot of room for somebody, and I think we've said it a lot before, to do perinatal psychology research. And you can do this like looking at different countries. You just got to find the right measures, and you could have some really interesting data. And it's virgin ground. Like there's not really much headway made into perinatal psychology. And this is coming from statista.com. So I'm sure you can find it. I just Googled like C-section by country, and this was like the first thing that came up. So yeah.
Brazil's rate in 2018 was 55.9%. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's about up there. That's like right around there with Turkey. It's wild. And, you know, I think Lenny's phrase is some of the largest uncontrolled psychological experiments in history is these C-sections. And it is really wild. And it's because we don't understand that this is a part of psychology we don't get, that we're going this way. Like we said, like, sure thing. Like, yeah, schedule it so you can be back at the golf club in 2 days without this baby weighing you down, you know? Like it's probably dismissive, but you know, like not all C-sections are necessary and not all C-sections are helpful. Some are definitely. Like I was an emergency C-section. Thankfully, C-sections were pretty good in 82. They're probably better now, but you know, I survived. I did okay. So, yeah, like just something to look at and something to consider.
Yeah.
I just really wish somebody would do this research. I would do it if I had the money, promise. Someone wants to help us fund a research
It's probably
group.
a long-term study, right? Like just paying attention to a generation.
Well, you could do it against randomized populations, or you could do it against, so compare caesarian borns to naturally borns by country. So you do like highest caesarian rate to lowest caesarian rate, like compare, you know, Turkey, Brazil, US, Poland with like the lowest caesarian rates, like maybe like Japan, or like I didn't really look at who was low on the list, and just, you know, 20 in each country of each type. And I don't know, within 400 people, you're probably going to be in good shape. And, you know, a long-term study would be good too, but you know, not all research needs to be long-term. Though it would be cool to follow somebody from birth till like age 20.
Yeah. And see, because I guess like what's some of Stan's theories behind that? Like no resolution, right? You're going through this death and rebirth process, and all of a sudden you're in this struggle and then it just ends, versus actually having that completion. And also bacteria, right? Like we know that the baby gets a lot of good bacteria through the birth canal.
Biome exposure, less ear infections. Yeah. But you know, they're working on techniques for fixing that a little bit. I think that's pretty common practice now, is like exposure to biome.
Right.
Yeah. And yeah, it's, you know, something I should really dig into more, like big, energetic, high effort projects, no completion of those projects. And, you know, it's kind of typical of the psychedelic world in a lot of ways too, like dreaming big and not executing necessarily.
Right.
Not trying to insult anybody, but, you know, look at how many projects you've started in the last couple of years and how many did you finish? My ratio is getting better, but it's still not ideal.
We do have a lot of untended projects.
Yeah. And, you know, Lenny's comment was, you know, if you want to like get ahead of it, you know, buy fitness equipment stocks in these countries like Mexico, Brazil, you know, Turkey. Like these people love to exercise. Like I love to exercise. I wish my body could support it still, but it's something I love. Yeah. So there's a lot there. It's a big topic. I would love to get, who wrote the book? Was it Kalia Taylor? I got it right here. Jane Butterfield English. I don't know if she's still with us. I remember her name.
What's the book title?
Different Doorway. Adventures of a Cartesian Born. So, like maybe we can get her on the show. If she's still around. It'd be really fun to chat with her about it. So, yeah, I guess that's it on Cartesian and caesarian born always get mixed up in me. But maybe we have so many caesarian borns because of the Cartesian paradigm.
Yeah, there you go. On to something there.
So let's jump over to this lymphatic stuff. I, not that long ago, finished reading Dr. Dan Engel's Concussion Repair Manual and really enjoyed it. And there was a lot of discussion around what happened after a brain injury, of like the blood-brain barrier becoming, more porous, like a lot more transaction with like what's in the rest of the body and bloodstream. Like typically only certain things should be able to get through the blood-brain barrier, but a lot more gets through after an injury. And how that's really like toxic and not good for the brain long-term. So you get all sorts of stuff that was never meant to be in there, and you don't really have a great way of handling it. And, this idea of like, how does the waste get out of the brain anyway? It seems like that was kind of a mystery. Like we assumed it happened, but it looks like a bunch of years ago, people realized that the lymphatic system extended into the brain and helped quite a bit getting, waste out of there and keeping the brain functioning well. And yeah, I just kind of ran into some Instagram and the quote was, the discovery of lymphatic vessels in the brain overturns decades of scientific dogma. And I think like my big takeaway is that we have a lot of body systems to keep us alive and healthy. Lymphatic system is one of them. And we want all of our systems to be firing really well, like working really well. If we want to like, have a healthy, happy life, like health is important and all these systems play into health. And now that we know the lymphatic system is in the brain, like maybe we should understand what the lymphatic system is and, how it helps us and how do we keep it healthy, stuff like that.
Right.
You found that article about brain cleaning system.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about this when you dropped that Instagram post in. So I just tried to do some research on this and found an article at the National Institute of Health. The article was dated October 17. Ironically, it was of 2017. So a little over 3 years ago. And it's called Brain Cleansing System Uses Lymphatic Vessels. I guess I'll read a little bit from here to give some context. Most of the body's organs remove dead cells and other waste using the lymphatic system. Lymphatic vessels run alongside blood vessels and transport out lymph, a colorless fluid containing infection-fighting immune cells and waste. Lymph is filtered through the lymph nodes and then returns back into the bloodstream. How the brain clears waste and fights infection, however, has been a mystery. Although human brain has blood vessels, there is no evidence it has a lymphatic system. Recently, studies in mice found evidence of the brain's lymphatic system in the dura, the brain's leathery outer coating. To look at the lymphatic vessels in primate brains, a team of researchers led by Dr. Daniel Reich at NIH, National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Strokes, used MRIs to scan the brains of 5 healthy human volunteers who were injected with dyes to help visualize blood in the lymphatic vessels. They've also scanned the brains of 3 monkeys. And the study was funded by part of NIH's NIND, the National Cancer Institute as well, and the National Institute of Aging. Yeah, so really interesting. So yeah, they found that these fluids were draining into the vessels and into the blood vessels. So it does sound like there is some sort of function there, which is really interesting. They said to confirm the vessels were lymphatic vessels, the teams used a dye that's too big to leak out of blood vessels. MRI scans from 2 subjects with this dye showed brightly lit blood vessels in the dura, but not the suspected lymphatic vessels. These results suggested that the first dye leaked out of the blood vessels into the surrounding lymphatic vessels. The researchers also looked at the suspected lymphatic vessels in autopsied humans and monkey brain tissue. They found the vessels contained specific cells and protein markers that are unique to lymphatic vessels and distinguished them from blood vessels. These findings suggest that the lymphatic system is a common feature in the mammalian brain. And to quote Reich, he said, "We literally watch people's brain drain fluid into these vessels. We hope that our results provide new insights on a variety of neurological disorders. These results could fundamentally change the way we think about the brain and the immune system interrelate."
Right. Like, this is kind of, I think, going to be the realm of integrative health, integrative psychotherapy and psychiatry. And like, we have to have healthy systems in order to have a healthy body. Dysfunction will happen when a single system kind of starts to not operate well. It's kind of natural for most of our systems, but how do we maintain health of all these systems? Perhaps it's a good idea to look at, is this person moving enough? Are they exercising enough? Is their body really rigid with character armor and like some other shitty somatic stuff getting in the way of, the proper functioning of these systems? Questions to ask and things to look at. Yeah, that's all I've really got on the lymphatic system. I do have another thing that I wanted to bring up that I didn't put in the list, Kyle.
Cool.
So late stage edition and perhaps timely. So we understand that people who use psychedelics are prone to make connections with things that don't necessarily have any kind of reality or ontological status. So like conspiracy thinking is an example of this. Like everything's a conspiracy versus, maybe a few of them are real. So a listener reached out with some concern about conspiracy in the psychedelic world, thinking that this could be the thing that delegitimizes the psychedelic movement by us kind of buying every conspiracy hook, line, and sinker. I like to think I'm a little more sophisticated than that. Like I love a few conspiracy theories, but most of the ones I hear, I'm just like, yeah, sure. Like unless I have data, like I can't say yes or no to that, or like I feel like it's unlikely. And the data often presented is pretty shitty. And like, I don't know if you heard about this, or I think I talked to you about it, but I made some posts about some artist that Microsoft was promoting, Ibrahimovic or something, who like was making these art pieces for museums that looked like bodies, like you were eating people or something. So it was like kind of cannibal art. And then Microsoft had some sort of, right. It was at like the Met or like some MoMA in New York or something. And I was like, oh, this looks pretty cool. Like, I don't see what the problem is. All these people were wigging out that, look, Microsoft is supporting like this cannibal pedophile conspiracy thing. Like, so this QAnon deal, which I don't really particularly like, suggests that all elites or a majority of elites are satanic cannibal pedophiles. And like the Pizzagate thing, that was like pretty well debunked in my opinion. Like there's no basement for the building that they supposedly met in, like Cosmos Pizza and DC Metro somewhere. I'm like, okay, that's kind of friggin' weird. Like, why are you making a conspiracy that can be debunked so easily? Perhaps because it can be created so easily and people, as soon as they want to believe something, choose to ignore evidence to the contrary. Like cognitive dissonance. Like, this doesn't match with my theory, therefore I'm out. So it's kind of a big deal in our world. Like, do you really want to be perpetuating things where there's not much great evidence and often evidence to the contrary of the theory? Like, sure, Epstein was like a big deal in this whole thing of like peddling young women to elites or young people to elites. I don't know if it was just women. And often in sex slave stuff. And, you know, a lot of important, powerful people, including politicians, were involved there. So like, what's the deal? Like, why don't we know more? Why was Epstein killed? Like, who killed him? Like, why don't we understand how that whole thing was operating better than we should? It's probably because of suppression. But does it mean the QAnon thing is true? No, I don't think so. Mitch Gomez had a kind of debunk on the QAnon stuff a while back, saying that a lot of these people that are reported as missing children, they run away like 5 to 10 times a year. So and they don't get reported or subtracted from that figure. So we're like in the many thousands per year of missing children. But what if they're found a day or two later? Fine. And then do it again.
I don't remember listening. I think it was Conspirituality. Actually, a past guest has been running this, Matthew Remski, and they had somebody on to talk about this. And I think they reported, most children that go missing are either kind of kidnapped or they go missing because a family member, it's usually family or a close friend that ends up, taking these children away. Not all the time, right? Like there are those cases, but I think she said, a majority of those cases, it's like a family member, a divorced parent, something like that,
So we see that number, and like in the QAnon world, they immediately assume it's abduction into sex trafficking. They don't really take in what are the other factors, what are the percentages here. Like, yes, children are abducted into sex trafficking. It just might not be the many thousands per year that's being kind of insisted on by the QAnon stuff. And, like the QAnon like talk track is just so crazy to me. It doesn't really work. Like if we take it to the extreme, it's kind of like, oh man, what was that movie with Roddy Piper where he put on glasses and could see everybody was aliens? They live or something.
I don't remember.
Yeah. So it's like, it's almost to that level. Like if you take this as true, like the extreme is that there's like these really powerful people that aren't really, they're barely human and they're doing other stuff. And when you dehumanize people, that really puts a troubling dynamic in place.
Mm-hmm.
And like I don't know if you've seen this, but I try to follow a little bit of what people are talking about on the right. And there's this kind of common talk track about California, the state of California, lowering penalties for sex with children, oral and anal sex with children, like lowering penalties. This is like a common trope in the Republican kind of like right kind of conspiracy world. And then they pair that along with the, and I haven't followed up on if this is true or not. So please don't quote me on that. Like this is just a trope that I see regularly there. And then a thing about like the dancing documentaries, like child dancers. Like dancing culture is pretty weird. Like raising somebody from age 6 to like dance like they're a fully mature woman. It's like kind of tricky. Like I don't really know what to do with that. And not to mention the dress. Like I grew up with a lot of girls that were dancers and it was great. It was fun to have them around. But, is there a problem there? Is there something weird about putting people in these like sexualizing young kids through dance culture? Dance moms love it. And this is another thing that's like, what is going on there? Why is this being amplified? Like, is it even true? This is like the cancel Netflix thing that was happening a little bit ago. I don't know if you saw that hashtag trending or anything, but it's a weird shit. We're not really sharing our worldviews really well across party lines. Like these two topics, I wouldn't be surprised if most people had never heard of that problem. But that's what's happening on the far right, or at least part of the right. You don't have to be too far right to want to protect children, but what is actually happening there? I think there's a lot more complicated factors in the mix than we might want to realize. And, it's not too hard to like split populations. And this is kind of what's happening. Facebook's no longer accepting ads for political stuff. Yeah. But I think as a result, they're able to deepen the divide between left and right to get more, I don't know what their metric is. Like eye seconds, like eyes over seconds.
I think so, like watch time.
Like how often are people on screen, on Facebook screens, phone or computer or otherwise. Like maybe that's their metric. And as people become more radicalized, they spend more time like getting that more and more data, getting more and more angry and more time. And
watch the social dilemma, right?
Ugh.
It's interesting. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, this stuff is so interesting. And, I have somebody close to me that's kind of down the Q hole, and, they shared a lot of stuff with me. I've watched it. I've been trying to understand it and not just, push it away and not entertain it. So it's been really interesting to watch it and see things from both sides. Sometimes I just, I don't know. I always come back to this Alan Moore quote with conspiracies. Yeah. And, to be honest, like I went down super deep conspiracy holes when I was younger.
Same.
Probably from like 16 up until, I don't know, 25, 26, like my mid-20s.
You had some weird experiences directly too. But
yeah. So, I mean, I had a very strange experience with the whole 9/11 thing. Somebody sent an AIM, instant message, when AIM was a thing, to a friend of mine. I was in 8th grade. And I don't know if I shared this on the podcast yet, but
you did once, but it's worth sharing again.
Yeah. And so, I had somebody reached out to a friend. My friend's username was Eyes of the World. So after the Grateful Dead. Cool. And yeah. And he was sending me the whole conversation. And so this person sent a message and said, "Hello, I am an alien." And, punctuation perfect, capitalization perfect. And back in those days, we just thought this must be a robot. This must be some sort of spam. Nobody talks like this because we're all using, crappy grammar and not capitalizing or punctuating at all. And the conversation was, "Hello, I am an alien. We're going to attack your country in 4 days. You have a chance to save your country. Here are the key codes on the side of the planes." Gave us all this information. And we were just like, yeah, whatever. And he was copying and pasting and sending this to me. And I remember when that all unfolded, our school didn't tell us what happened. They went the whole day without telling us. And all these kids are getting pulled out of school. And they just said, there's bees outside and people are allergic. And so their parents are coming to pick them up. So we knew something was off because everybody was like in a frenzy, and the school just kind of lied to us because I guess they were trying to just contain the chaos. But I remember when that last bell rang, we saw each other as we were leaving, and we locked eyes and we looked at our hands and counted to 4, and it was 4 days. And just weird that, they sent us messages about like key codes on planes. And I remember I was like, dude, you have to try to get in touch with the FBI and, get this stuff dug up. I think he did call the FBI. I don't know if they were able to recover the conversation, or I don't really know what happened there, but, so I went down some rabbit holes, and I know there was part of the conspiracies or part of the theories that, there was intel. People were reaching out through different telecommunication networks, trying to warn people about this. And to be on that end and actually see a conversation and something like that, thinking back, it's kind of weird, So, I definitely had some sort of thing to be like, this happened to me. And could I believe that this was an inside job at times, or what happened? Yeah. It was pretty fucked up to see that. But I always kind of come back, just thinking about a lot of this stuff, it's so hard to prove at times, right? And I don't know, this came up on Facebook, maybe, I guess, as the conspiracy theories started to really take hold. Somebody posted this Alan Moore quote. And, sometimes this is how I feel about a lot of this stuff. Where he said that the main thing I've learned about conspiracy theory is that the conspiracy theorists believe in a conspiracy because that's more comforting. The truth of the world is that it is actually chaotic. The truth is that not the Illuminati, the Jewish banking conspiracy, or the great alien theory. The truth is far more frightening. Nobody's in control. The world is rudderless. And, I think when I think about human psychology, it is so much easier and more comforting to attach to a theory than actually sit in this chaos that we literally have no idea what we're doing here. And to think that there is some grand scheme unfolding at times, and there are powerful people, right, trying to control things. But I think when we come to the root of it, I think nature is more in control of anything, and I think it's just this kind of cognitive dissonance that we have control over life. And, there's the people that are trying to control it. They're trying to put their plans forward, and there's powerful people in the world. I'm not doubting that at all. But I think I sit in more of this existential belief of we're on this freaking rock just floating through space. And do we really have everything figured out? And is there something out there that's so intelligent that has this huge scheme and they're pulling the strings at every moment? Maybe it's not, could happen, but I don't know. I think I fall in this idea that the world is chaotic, and that is a tough truth to sit with. It's like that existential despair. It's like, well, shit, what's actually going on here?
Robert Anton Wilson had some similar stuff there. Like, I love how Alan Moore had that line. Alan Moore is amazing, and you guys should check him out if you haven't read any Alan Moore stuff. But this idea of there being no oarsman or helmsman, like it's a really interesting kind of cybernetic idea that there is like a helmsman steering the planet, but there's too many variables. There's probably hundreds of big conspiracies out there, all competing. Like the idea that there's one that's winning is silly. Like right. Iran has its own, Israel has its own. We've got our own. Well, the United States alone probably has hundreds of conspiracies operating at once. Like Noam Chomsky at one point said, all it takes for there to be a conspiracy is 3 people and 2 people to plan against the other. Like right. 2 people to try to sell a third person something. And it's not, like these things happen. Like powerful people try to do whack stuff, like drug company cover-ups, like weird invasions of countries. Confessions of an Economic Hitman, I think, does really well, kind of playing out like what's going on in the global stage. But, it doesn't, like, how does that relate to these big, weird things like QAnon? Like, I don't think it does. Like, it's a lot easier to just look at money and how money works at, like, really large scales. And then you get a better idea what's going on. But really, that's just one lens through which you can look at the world. Like your point, Kyle, we're just flying around this rock. We don't know what the hell's happening. We're, fighting over parts of our asteroid. And not realizing that we're on one spaceship and should probably get it together, unify a little bit more, and try to live as long as we can on this planet with as little suffering as we can. That's kind of the more kind of humanist thing, but it's kind of where I land most of the time.
I think this is like kind of where maybe philosophy comes into play, like trying to find like truth, and how do we know truth, and how do we know wisdom, and what is to be true, and how can we ask those questions to try to figure out what truth is. I did a podcast with a friend. I don't know if it ever got released. I don't think it will, but we recorded just this idea of what's truth and how do you know what is true. And we went down some wormholes, especially with conspiracy theory stuff. It's like, how can you validate that is true? And what do you know to be true in your world? And it's a hard thing to really understand. I mean, I think when I think about it, I think the only true thing that I know is this present moment.
Getting Cartesian.
Like I'm here.
I can doubt everything other than my cognition and mind right now. That's the Descartes' dilemma. Yeah, it's interesting. How do we know more? How does knowledge work? Epistemology, metaphysics. These are massive questions. And, like as much as I appreciate science, I feel like science could benefit a lot from being philosophy aware. Like what are we really doing? What kind of metaphysic and epistemology underlies our go forward here? Like, is there data to suggest that mind and brain aren't the same thing? Yes, there is.
Right.
Including top neurologists like Carl Pribram and others. Like the mind is not equal brain. And how do we transcend that and go forward? Like, I know this is not what the establishment wants us to be saying. Like, if we want to talk about conspiracies, like just look at scientism versus philosophy and the humanist traditions. Like, it's really quite a battle that's been going on for a long time, probably since the time of Newton, or before even. Like it's, and we get into that in the class. Get into like this whole, like we're not speaking each other's languages, and if we're not sharing definitions on terms, then what are we even doing? We're just kind of
Right.
doing the Tower of Babel thing, like unable to communicate while we're building this huge monstrosity.
Right.
Yeah. So interconnectedness of all things. Go ahead.
Yeah. And I just think coming back to that person's email, I think there is a little bit of susceptibility within our community.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of as Terence McKenna said, psychedelics do promote funny ideas. Had lots of funny ideas.
Totally.
And I think sometimes I'm more susceptible to believe in funny ideas. And I think this is where some of the critical thinking really kind of comes into play with, these experiences. Like, how can you trust that entity that came out of the DMT space and gave you truth? Like, how do you recognize that is truth? And so, convert that to ideas and theories that are going on right now. Like, how can you feel that could be true instead of getting sucked in and entertaining ideas, which is fun. But like, at what point does it become dangerous and promotes either harm or, puts people at risk?
Further to like a more recent example for us, like these businessmen saying, hey, we got these patches that have no drugs on them, but vibrate at the frequency of ketamine, and you get the ketamine effect through transdermal electronic vibration. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And you expect me to believe it without sending me some to try? Like, I don't even understand how you would convince somebody of that. Like, it's like, this is a common idea in the new age in the psychedelic world, like structured water and like, symbols changing things like that. I forget the guy's name, famous kind of
Japanese scientist,
pseudoscientist. I like to call him a pseudoscientist because I feel like a lot of what he did was debunked pretty hard, like structuring water through symbols like Om, or chanting things at it, or like, doing hateful things to the water and changing the structure of water that way. It's like, I don't know if I buy that. And same thing with this ketamine patch.
I just did see I don't know how truthful the video was. I have to go back and research it a little bit more, but I just saw that they did a study on plants. One plant was, yelled at, bullied, and the other one was, fed loving thoughts. And the one that was like, just fed negative thoughts ended up like looking pretty ill and sick and shitty, while the other one seemed to be thriving. I think they gave them the same amount of water, same amount of food, but the one was just like bombarded with negative thoughts all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I mean, I guess thinking, the vibrational energy, right? We're all connected. Maybe there's something else out there that connects us, and life is vibration, wave, particles. Could you influence that by thoughts and sound and stuff like that?
I think yes, but I want to like say we're not very mature in this area either. Like Nikola Tesla, like one of my favorite lines from him is like, if you want to understand the nature of reality, understand frequency and vibration.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really huge. Again, it's like an easy thing to sell, right? Like, you hate something, it doesn't do well. You love something, it goes well. I want to believe it, but I remember this guy, the Resonance Project, Harriman or something like that. He like had this whole toroidal structure of the universe and all this vibration stuff, and he would like claim that he found the way to structure water such that all plants would do better. Like, this is now the cure for humanity's aging and like the agriculture crisis. He made some device, and like I saw some videos where they supposedly had like regular water versus this other water, and like stuff did well with his special water. But I'm like, okay, like great, you've got a device, and this shit was 10, 12 years ago that I was reading about it, and it hasn't gone anywhere. Like, the reason I think it didn't go anywhere is that it wasn't really that impressive when they scaled it up to 20 to 50 to 100 plants. Maybe it was an aberration, like a statistical aberration or something, or maybe it was fraudulent. I don't know. It's hard. Whenever people start talking about vibration and stuff, I have to like, my guard goes up, my character armor kicks in, and I'm like, no, hold on. What's your sample size? Is like kind of my new kind of catchphrase. Like like, and people can say that same thing around psychedelics, like what's your sample size? How many people had that past life experience out of per 1,000?
Right.
How many were validated per 1,000? Probably way less than one.
Mm-hmm.
Stan Groff having 14,000 plus cases, like it's a different deal. Like at that sample size, you can pull some really interesting anomalies out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, kind of going through a whole transpersonal program, I've obviously been exposed to a lot of transpersonal stuff. And there was a time where I'm trying to balance my skepticism and critical thinking skills versus the belief, right? Like, well, maybe some of this stuff works when you actually believe it. And what happens when you constantly criticize it or don't want to believe it because maybe evidence isn't there. So I always went back and forth between that of like, maybe like I'm blocking myself from actually, taking in this energy and actually believing it because I want to be critical about it and I don't want to believe it. And so like, you're thinking about intention setting, even in like ritual, right? It's like, I'm thinking about like Mythbusters, like redid Cleve Baxter's science experiment with plants. He hooked up electrodes to plants. So I think he originally found out he had these electrodes hooked up. He was like a pioneer in the polygraph. And he had it hooked up because he wanted to try to measure water throughout the plant and how the plant responds to water and see if he could measure that. And he was getting pissed off that he wasn't getting anything. And so he grabbed a lighter or a match and wanted to burn the plant. He saw these spikes. And on the graph, he's like correlating that to emotion. It looked like a human emotion spiking. So he did all these different experiments to see if plants were responsive to the environment. And, one experiment was like setting up this timer that dropped in some sort of, small organism into a boiling hot water when he wasn't there. And so, he would just set it up randomly, timer would go off, it would drop these small organisms into boiling water that would kill them and see if the plant responded. And he said we would get some responses from it. And I think Mythbusters tried to recreate that and they didn't get much out of it. And I guess that kind of gets into the observer effect. Like if you're setting that intention to get a certain response, is the environment going to react the same way versus when you're just doing things? I don't know.
Right. That's where you could kind of like blind it with the different equipment. So if the researchers, two different research teams, one had good equipment, one had other equipment, you would get some interesting data that way, I think. And
yeah, I'm not 100% sure. It's been a while since I watched the Mythbusters, so I'm not too sure how they set things up. It was years ago when I watched that, but
it's like funny, right? Because we do know that plants do respond to the environment. We do know that kind of an ecosystem is kind of like an orchestra of life in a lot of ways. Like, and we don't even have to, talk about kind of magical things. It's like the hawk understands, or like prey understands, like when a certain other animal kind of warns that a predator is coming, and like the ecosystem changes.
Yeah.
So the systems are complex. Their mechanisms of interaction are not yet fully understood. We're getting better. Like I think critical thinking is helpful. It's not necessarily super helpful if you're trying to, I think there is room for skepticism on this spiritual path. We just have to like couch it appropriately. Like if we're trying to become enlightened or whatever it is, skepticism is helpful because there's some shitty gurus out there. Like Matthew Remski is an example of that. Got pulled into multiple cults.
Yeah, as much as I'm open to a lot of this stuff, like even after my near-death experience, obviously I was really open to a lot of stuff, but I also approach a lot of stuff with skepticism, going, I don't know if I believe in this. And then having experiences and being like, well, that totally changed my belief system and kind of changed things. And so I think it is important to have healthy skepticism and not always just buy into everything right away. I think it's important to have like experience and figure out what is truth to you in those moments instead of just being fed something like, I believe it. Is it truthful in your body? Are you feeling that? Does it feel true to you?
Yeah. And, what are your personal criteria for truth? Maybe this is something we all need to really think about. Like, there's probably people who work in a university setting who are hardcore scientists that in their personal life are still going to astrologers and tarot cards and psychics and whatever, and psychedelic sessions and personifying the spirit of ayahuasca as a goddess of some kind. And, and then they go back and do their day job, which is hardcore science. And they were able to have that division. And they've proven this stuff enough to themselves where they believe it, but they don't necessarily have to perpetuate that. It's not enough data to really say, yeah, cool. We've proven that astrology is real to the degree that it's now at all the major universities as a field of study. It's a different kind of deal, but something that we, what's worth believing for you isn't necessarily universalizable to everybody.
Right.
You found salvation in Santeria, but doesn't mean everybody else will.
Right.
Yeah. Weird example. I want to check out some Santeria rituals eventually, but haven't had the chance yet. All right, man. Well, we're almost at an hour and a half. You want to kind of wrap?
Yeah. I'm sorry for the tangent. Hopefully it was helpful. But just important to highlight, Yeah. I'm glad that person reached out and let that kind of, voice their opinion on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, are you doing the psychedelic movement a service by spreading stuff that you haven't necessarily validated very well, haven't spent years kind of being exposed to? Yeah, maybe that's the question to ask yourself.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess if you want to help us out, leave us a review over on, Facebook, iTunes, your podcast app, wherever, or tell a friend. We appreciate it. And Joe and Kyle sign off. See y'all next time. Take care, everybody.
Take care, everybody.